All right, today we're talking about setting an emotion and how you can combine the two to have a deeper effect on your reader. So, setting an emotion requires you to use concrete descriptive phrases, much like what we talked about at the beginning of the poetry unit and throughout the poetry unit. And it requires you to choose your words carefully in order to emphasize the emotion that you want your reader to feel. Or that you want them to understand about your characters. And word choice really does matter in this situation. You want the reader to understand exactly how the character is viewing things, or you want them to be influenced in the case of a narrator who is third person who isn't actually involved in the action. So let's take a look at this passage from The Story of an Hour. If you've read it, this is in the middle of the story. If you haven't read The Story of an Hour yet, go read it. It's a page long, very short. Anyway, you can also pause the video and just read this section. So here, Mrs. Mallard has just learned that her husband is dead, or she believes that her husband is dead, and she goes off by herself to her room and does this and sees these things. So I've picked out all of the details from this passage. There's an open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair, an open square outside the window. She sees the tops of trees that are all aquiver with the new spring life. There's the delicious breath of rain was in the air. Somewhere a peddler was crying his wares, the notes of a distant song that someone was singing. She can hear this thing. Countless sparrows are twittering in the eaves, and patches of blue sky show here and there through the clouds that have piled up on the horizon. So if you look at all these details, these are set up, even though we believe that she is sad at this point, she's been crying, she goes off to be by herself, all of these details build us up to believe that she's going to be happy, that she is not as upset as we think she's going to be. And sure enough, that's what we find out. She feels freed by this. We have an open window, the armchair is comfortable and roomy, the square is open. Like, the word open in both of these cases means she feels free. She feels like there's nothing constraining her. Trees are aquiver with new spring life. There's all of these ideas that show us that she's happy, that this is a positive thing for her. We could very easily change all of these details. I did this, it took me less than a minute to change all of these details to something that reflects a more negative emotion. And this points the reader to a different way of looking at things. If the window, instead of being open, is shadow, the armchair is lonely, the square is cluttered, you can read the rest of these. Like, all of these point in a more negative direction. And so you can see that that Kate Chopin was pointing the reader toward believing a certain thing about Mrs. Mallard's emotions before we even got there in the text. So this is something that you can do in your own writing. You use your power, use the details that you choose to share with the reader to influence the reader's emotions the way that they're going to read a scene. When you're doing this, you need to always remember voice and point of view. So in The Story of an Hour and in the other texts we've read, the details that are given, the details that are plucked from a scene and shared with the reader, always come through in the character's voice, or the narrator's voice if it's in narrative. But if we're getting a close third perspective or a first person point of view, then we have to be in that character's voice, in their point of view. How do they see things? So Mrs. Mallard, in that part of the story, we are close third on Mrs. Mallard, and she sees these things that way. And those things are communicated to us in her voice. And also, it's important to note that your descriptions of these things can change from scene to scene. Just because an armchair is comfortable and roomy in one situation doesn't mean it isn't lonely in another situation, depending on what has changed or who is looking at it. All right, so that's what I have right now. There is a short writing exercise up on Blackboard already for this week. I'm going to talk about that more in the next video, which will also be short and cover foreshadowing. So thanks for watching.